So hi everyone, thanks for coming and attending the talk. I am Vaibhav, I am the founder and CEO of Privado. And today we are going to talk about the upcoming Play Store data safety section. So if you have an Android app on Play Store, you might have seen the data safety form there. Of course, I've seen a bunch of questions on Reddit, etc. So we'll talk about that. So on today's agenda, I wanted to chat about a couple of things. So first of all, how did I, building a privacy tech company, get caught involved into the Play Store data safety project and into the community? A little bit of history of Google and privacy and how did we get here? We'll also touch about the different components of Play Store data safety section, like what is this data collection, what is data sharing. I'll take a couple of examples that I've picked from, which are questions from either issues on my project or Reddit itself, and then we'll go through them. Finally, I'll give you a quick demo of the tool itself that we have built, the data safety generator, and then of course Q&A. Perfect. So at the heart of it, Privado is essentially a code scanning tool purpose built for privacy. So if you've used tools like Sneak or Git Guardian, essentially, you've used some scanning tool for security. We've built something for privacy. And what we essentially do is we help companies and especially the privacy teams there get visibility into, hey, what's the data, personal data product like a mobile app or an internal service like payments is collecting or sharing or processing? Are there any hidden data flows like to logs? Or and also like third party data sharing. And the story is essentially I was pitching my product to one of the privacy team in a European company, and the privacy officer asked me, "Hey, can we use your product to generate the Play Store data safety report?" And I said, "Of course, why not? You can." And then what really happened was after the call, I went to Google and started searching what this Play Store data safety report is, and it was a mess. So all I found was questions on Stack Overflow, questions on Reddit about, hey, I have AdMob in my app. What do I do about it? I'm using Firebase Analytics. What do I need to disclose? I have a web view. Do I need to disclose that as well? So a lot of questions in the community around, how to fill this report. And one common thread across all of them was, hey, I have these SDKs and what do I need to disclose? And that's how I actually started interacting and started building my tool. So my first project was actually, and it's still live on GitHub. It's open source documentation project. So you can pick all the popular SDKs, and we have documentation of what we need to fill in the Play Store data safety report. And that's how it all started, right? And once I created that, I got a lot of issues and a lot of discussions from there, and started building the product as well. Now, before I sort of jump into the Play Store data safety, a little bit of detour into how we actually got there. So, of course, Google has its own fair share of privacy issues, both on the European side with GDPR and on the US side as well. Uh, but I think the main shifting moment was the major changes on the iOS side, or the which Apple brought in. One was, of course, to stop this cross-tracking, cross-device tracking, cross-app tracking that Apple brought in, and we could hear the impact of it on Facebook, Snap, earrings. But another one was this price nutrition label, which is live in Apple. So if you're a Flutter developer or you have an Apple app as well, you could see these Apple privacy nutrition on Apple Store, which tells about the data that the app is collecting or tracking or linking, things like that. So a lot of the I think a lot of this inspiration about this Play Store data safety has come from here and this movement on the platform side. And a couple of initiatives. So there are a couple of things like on the Android side as well on the privacy front. So one is of course the data safety report itself that we're talking about. There's Play Integrity API on the Play Store side, and for the end users as well, Android is building some products. So one is the privacy dashboard, wherein users can actually see what data is shared with multiple apps. There is of course permission management has improved, so sharing only while using the app, and there is talks about the privacy sandbox to phase out cookies and other things. Right? These are a couple of the initiatives that Android has taken. We are going to focus on the data safety part as well. And this was sort of the comment on Reddit which captured the motion perfectly, which is Apple's forcing Google to care about privacy more. I think that's good for everyone as well. So for the users, they know what's really happening by the app in terms of what data is being collected. And for app developers like you, I think it's a really good way to separate out from malicious apps who are trying to collect more data than than your app and not being transparent to the end user, right? And as Shalom was transparent enough to mention, what data is being shared with third parties like us, I think becomes super important for you as app developer to disclose as well. A quick timeline of where we are in terms of the data safety section. So it started in May of 21 with the first blog post. October 21 is since the data safety form is live in the Play console, and some of you might have filled the form already. There's been a slight delay in terms of the timelines. So now the end users, your app users, will start seeing the data safety form on the Play App Store itself by the end of April. And 20th July is the deadline for app developers to fill the form and submit it. And post 20th July, Android can actually do a couple of things. They can stop your new releases or even take down the app. So I would say take the 20th July date seriously and start a couple of weeks earlier if you can, even now, because it takes some time to fill this form, especially if you have a large app and multiple developers working on that. Perfect. So jumping into sort of the different components of the data safety section report itself. So I divided into a couple of sections and also looking at kind of questions which were asked. So the first one is data collection really. So and Android sort of is asking you to disclose what data types your app is collecting. And look at it is like this: any data type as defined by Android which is leaving via your app off of user's device is data collection. And it could be going back to a database, back to your backend server, or to a third party like Intercom. All of that is data collection. Data sharing is nothing, is like a subset of data collection. So any data which is moving out but is being shared to a third party is data sharing. There are a lot of caveats for data sharing which we are going to discuss ahead. But just to explain, third party means any other company, organization other than the app publisher. So that's what a third party means. Purposes and security are the easier ones. So purpose is the reason why your app is collecting or sharing data, and these are things like analytics, account management, developer relations, things like those. Security, currently it's very limited. It's about if data is encrypted while it's leaving the device. So it's probably just one question. But on the roadmap for data safety is a comprehensive data security audit, which you can actually display to the end user. And that's maybe coming towards later this year. Awesome. So yeah, so this I've seen a lot of questions around what data collection is. So spending most of the time here. So let's take a simple mobile app, and again, just to sort of recollect, data collection as defined by the Play Store data safety is any data type that is leaving the user's device via your app. And if you look at the transmission which is happening, it could happen for a couple of reasons. It could be going to your database. It could be going to a third-party API like Stripe or an SDK like AdMob. It could be going to your server, or you might be opening a web view from which you might be sending the data off, right? So if you control the code and behavior on that web view, it's not that, since it's not an Android app, it's a web page which has opened, that you don't have to disclose. If that web view is controlled by you, even data collection there has to be disclosed by you. So this is really when data is being transmitted. If you look at the source of data, a couple of places where you might be doing data collection. One is, of course, user forms, so login form, registration forms, things like those. Another is permission. So if you have a location permission, audio permission, contact permission, all of those permissions might be directly or in the background be collecting data and transmitting off. So those are the ones that you have to look at. If you have third-party SDKs, the thing is these SDKs collect some data automatically. So, like for example, if you have AdMob, they might be collecting users' device ID. If you have some Firebase SDKs, they might be collecting Firebase identifiers automatically, which you don't really have control of. So those have to be mentioned as a part of data collection as well. So these are some sources of data collection for your Play Store data security. Moving on, I want to take again, this is a question which was an issue which was created on our project. So it was, hey, I'm using Google Play billing. Do I have to disclose credit card data being collected by my app or not? And this is how the flow goes. So you have your mobile app, and on the billing screen, a Google Play screen opens up. So you are sharing order data with Google Play SDK. So for sure, that is being collected. That's being transmitted to a third party. So that is there. Now the question is, do we also disclose credit card data which is being inputted by the user on the Google Play screen where you do not have any control of, right? So first of all, since you do not have control of, so far it doesn't seem that you are collecting it. But let's look at the implementation. So If that SDK is giving you a callback to your backend, and if that credit card number is coming back even in a mass state to you, in that case, you do have to disclose that credit card data is being collected by your app. If not, in that case, you are collecting order data and transaction data. And this is something which was clarified by Google as well. So pretty much in sync there. Another example was that, hey, Google is asking me to disclose data if I have web views as well. And the example was an app which is similar to Hacker News, where it's a link of all the news article. And then once a user clicks on a link, the app developer has no control of what data collection happens there. So the answer here is that you worry about what's happening on your app, and all the data which is being collected on the web views, since you do not control the code or behavior of those web pages which are opening as web views, you don't really have to disclose uh, data collected there. So just look at the part where you control the behavior and code, and that's about it. Moving on to some exemptions. So there are some cases in which if you are collecting data, that's exempted for you to put in the form. So the first one is on-device access and provisioning. This is, imagine something data processing happening on the device as well. So imagine if you're taking sensor data and processing it to display the results back, and no data is leaving user's device. In that case, it's exempted. Another case is end-to-end encryption. So think WhatsApp. In WhatsApp, messages will leave the user device in an encrypted way, and then will only get decrypted on another user's device where you're sending the message. In those cases, that those messages don't need, which are completely end-to-end encrypted, and no one can decrypt them in the middle, those data types need not be part of your data safety report. So these are some exemptions which exist in terms of data collection. Moving on data sharing. So again, so once you have sort of figured out all the data collection part, and that includes any data which is going to a third party, comes the tricky part, which is what data you are really sharing. So first of all, data sharing is going to be a subset of your data collection, because any data which is shared is data collected. Now, first thing that you have to look at is, for me to figure out what data is being shared, you have to look at data flowing to a third party, which is anything other than you as an app publisher. And if you look at what are the different cases where this data sharing might be happening to a third party, is either via web view. So this was the Stripe or PayPal example that we discussed last time, wherein a PayPal or a Stripe web view might open in your web app, and then user might enter some data there. Server to server sharing, so via an API. Third party SDKs. This is the most given example. So you have an AdMob SDK, and that's collecting data automatically, and that's something that has to become a part of your data sharing section of your form. And finally, this is an edge case. I'm not looked into it much in detail, but it is mentioned. So it's basically, let's say your app is sharing data with another app on the phone itself. That's also considered data sharing. But if someone is doing this, we can connect offline and discuss more. Having said that, data sharing has a lot of caveats and a lot of confusion around it. So the next part is where you have to focus a little bit. So while these are all cases where you are sharing data to a third party, there are some exemptions in which you don't need to make it a part of your Play Store data safety report. So the first one is which is the most confusing one, which is service providers. So service providers is a fancy word for mostly any SaaS app which is processing data on your behalf, which means that it's following your instructions. So imagine Stripe. Let's take Stripe as an example. You're actually telling Stripe to collect payment on your behalf, and hitting those APIs. So in that case, it's a service provider, and all the transaction data need not be put in as data shared. It has to be put as data collected, but not as data shared. However, in the same example, if Stripe is using that data for things like fraud prevention, those cases need to be mentioned as data sharing. And hence, this piece becomes really complex. And to solve this, what we have to do is read the official documentation of AdMob, of Stripe, and all these third-party providers to figure out what they are really doing with data, and then correspondingly add that as a part of Play Store data safety report. Some other simpler cases where you are exempted from adding the data that you're sharing with a third party as a part of your data safety report is legal purposes. So let's say for law enforcement agency comes and asks you for sharing some data, you don't have to mention as a part of data safety report. Another one is user-initiated action. So this is where, let's say, if you have a login with Facebook or login with Google, in that case, first of all, the sharing will be initiated by a user. And once the screen opens up, it will be clear the Google or Facebook policy, privacy policy links will be there. in those cases you are exempted of not of those data types which are going to Google or Facebook that need not be part of your data safety report. And finally, anonymized data or encrypted data. This is data which you can't link back to a user. In those cases, again, if you're sharing anonymized data with a third party, those data type need not be a part of your data safety report. Phew. So that's all about Play Store data safety report. Of course, when you start going into it, it becomes challenging, and that's why we built a tool. And basically, it's exhausting. It takes a lot of hours. There are a lot of questions around it, especially if you have multiple developers working on it. Even the first step of identifying what data you're collecting becomes a challenge. You have to ask a couple of folks. If you have permissions, then you have to read a long documentation of Google to figure out which permission corresponds to which data type. Uh, and it's a maze. Then, if you have third-party SDKs and APIs, you have to read the documentation to figure out what data types you need to collect and what data types you're collecting and what data types you have to put in sharing and the purposes. And then finally, once you have all of this information, then go back to Google, Play Console, fill the form, figure out the documentation, and fill it right. And to solve that, what we launched, the Privado Code Scan, which is a free data safety form generator. Essentially, it's a command line tool. It runs on your local machine, and no code leaves your machine. What we do is we scan your uh, mobile apps code to figure out all the forms, all the permissions, all the SDKs, and then figure out the first part, which is data type collection and data type sharing. And then once that part is there, then we take you through a guided wizard to get the answer of purposes and security. And at the end of it, we give you a CSV that you can directly import in your Play Store console and be done with the data safety report. And since we become a part of your scanning, we also push this file as a part of your GitHub repository. That's something you can do. And once you do that, multiple people can collaborate on that. So we'll come to that later. Perfect. Let me quickly move to the demo as well. Awesome. So for the demo, what I'm going to do is we have this open source Android app by Kickstarter. This is something that I'm going to use and demo the product on. Uh, Before I go, just FYI, this is the open source SDK project. We have a lot of contribution here. And if you want to check it out later, I'll put the link. But we have quite a few SDKs and their data available. And powering with the help of this SDK, this is the link to our uh, data safety report generator. Only thing prerequisite here is Docker, and then you can run it on your machine. So off to demo. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I've already installed Privado on my machine, and it's up and running. And I'm going to, and I've already scanned the Android Kickstarter open source app so that we don't waste any time looking at my terminal. So I'm just going to load the results and show you that. Cool. So hopefully it works. It'll take a couple of seconds for me to show you the results. Awesome. Cool. So the results are there. So this is based on a previous scan I've run. So first of all, as you can see, it's local host. So even the UI runs locally in your machine. No code, none of this information goes back to Privado. So first of all, just digging in for this Kickstarter app, we have figured out that there are some 17 data elements that Privado has discovered. There are some 9 third-party integrations. And then our key CTI is you to generate the data safety report. So let's get right into it. Cool. So before you start, essentially our data discovery is very granular. So we look at these data elements and they are mapped to data types. So for example, you can see we found first name and last name, but on Android side, there's only one data type for it, name. We are more granular, but we handle the we make sure that we are mapping them correctly to the data types. And you can see what Privado has figured out. So on step one, it's just making sure that you review the data and make sure there are no false positives that are going ahead. So you can quickly click on occurrences, see what Privado has figured out. If it's correct, you can mark it correct. Even if you don't, it will still flow through. But if it is wrong, you can mark it as false positive. Generally, how we've seen developers use this is they generally see the data types that Privado has discovered. And let's say if they see this location data being wrong, they will just click see, hey, this doesn't seem right. Let me mark it as false positive so that it doesn't go ahead. And let's say we look at another one, this approximate location. And this has come in because you have this course location permission in your app, and this is mapped to the Android data type, and hence that's why it is here. So step one is really looking at different occurrences and making sure these are right. Again, this is profile picture. This has to be part of your data safety report, hence it is here. And that's really about step one, right? Moving on, step two is where we've tried to use that open source documentation repository to pre-fill your Android data type. So first of all, again, you can look at the SDKs or the third parties that Privado has discovered. So this is Crashlytics by Firebase, and from the official documentation, we have figured out all the associated data types. So we have done for Google Analytics as well. And there are some more cases. So there is segment that Privado has discovered. There is stripe that Privado has discovered. Unfortunately, we don't have any documentation for these, and hence these are empty. So we rely on developers to put this information correctly in the next steps. And as you'll keep moving and keep pushing this, we'll keep saving it locally. So even if you come back to this and just run the Privado load command, it will start from there. So yeah, so just sort of starting in the data safety section. So the first question is pre-filled again because we already have discovered some data collection happening here. In case there would be zero data, we would just cut this completely. So is data encrypted in transit? This is Google asking you if you're using HTTP, SSL, TLS, etc. So I'm going to mark it yes. Another question, hey, is there a delete mechanism on the app? So if you have a settings page where user can click on delete button, you can mark it yes. Please note, and Google does not really care if you're deleting it, but if you are offering the user an option to delete, you should really delete user data. The next step is where you are mentioning the data types you're collecting and sharing. I've already touched about this in the presentation, so I'm not going to go in detail. As you can see, all the data types are marked as collected because that's what Privado has discovered. Some of them are already marked as shared, and this is again coming from the open source documentation repository. So we have looked at an SDK, and that data is being collected and shared. I'm going to go ahead and say that hey, we are also sharing email address as an additional input that I know of this app, and then move ahead to the next step. There's some more details around process formally. This is a use case that I'm not seeing, although it's available on Google, so I'm not going to spend time on this piece. Again, if you have some questions, we can discuss in here. Cool. So yeah, once you've done that, the next step is for you to define what data types that you're collecting are required and optional. And required and optional, again, is pre-filled based on the SDK part, because we don't really know how your app works. But if you have an SDK, we can actually tell if some data types are being required or optional. And when you're looking at required or optional, look at it like this. The data types which are completely mandatory for your app to work have to be marked as required. So things for authentication, things like those. If you are an Uber, for you, location data will be required. But if you have an app where its location data is required for a site feature and is not at all required for a regular function, you can mark it as optional. So I'm going to mark some of these as required and some of these as optional. Like photos for sure is optional for my app. You don't really need it. Then comes final two questions about purposes. So purposes is the reason why you are collecting data, and these are pretty standard. Again, if you read through it, it will explain to you why you are, which purpose, which means account management is for login, sign up, app functionalities are core features, analytics is for things like Google Analytics, developer communication is for sending emails, advertising I think is the easiest one. So again, these are pre-filled based on the information we have on SDKs. We don't know your app completely, so we will not know all the information. So this is where we rely on your input. So I'm going to mark some of these. So I'm going to mark this approximate location as app functionality, email address for app functionality and account management, and so on and so forth. And then photos for personalization, and done. Again, if you are not sure, you can leave it and come back to it, ask questions, we save it, just run the Privado load command and it will work from there. As you can see, these data types are a little less. So here you will only see the data types where you need to show the purposes for data sharing. So only these data types are marked as data shared in the earlier step. And some of them are pre-filled based on the SDK information. I'm going to say that we're using email address for advertising and approximate location for personalization and done. That's it. So your data safety report is done. You can save it as a PDF, share it with your fellow developers. If you have a privacy team, please share it with them as well. And So this is one. You can also download our report as CSV. So if you click here, it will automatically download. And this CSV is in the format that you can directly go to Play Store console and import it. Of course, there's a guide that you can look at how to do that. You can go on our GitHub page, give us a star, and if you want, give us some feedback as well. Perfect. So here are some links that could be useful. I'll put them in the chat as well. But that's about it. Open to Q&A.
Okay.
Hey, Shalom.
Well, thank you, Vaibhav, for that. Let's give everybody a couple minutes to, if they want to write any questions. Otherwise, we can go back to the tables, and if anybody has questions that's more, you'd like more of an interactive conversation, you could just speak with Vaibhav at the table. But yeah, really, thank you so much. I think what Privado is building will be helpful for many people, and yeah, I mean, it solves some issue that many of us have to deal with. Cool.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, especially once I sort of started building even the SDK project. A lot of issues got opened up by Android developers because it's currently, I mean, it's a big change in terms of figuring out all the information and no central place really to go find all of that.
Oh, we have a question. Pop that on stage.
Looks useful, does it remove? Oh yeah, so if the Android developer marks any of the data that Privado has discovered as false positive, those don't flow into your core data set.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, so I didn't know there is a parallel policy webinar going on. How would I know all my SDKs? I'll have to thanks for that.
All right, cool. So I feel like this is a good chance to switch over back to the tables. We'll take a little bit break. Let's see, how long of a break do we have? Till 2:15 my time. So I think we get a nice 55-minute, 55-minute break. I think it's 55 minutes if I know how to do math, which I don't claim to. Alrighty. Well, Vaibhav, thank you so much, folks. See whoever wants to hang out at the tables over there. Next up will be Jesse Wilson's talk after the break. Ciao.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shalom. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.